Hello, dear friends and adventurers. It's Rob, the D&D wannabe, here with some exciting news. This podcast is now made possible in partnership with our good friends at Misty Mountain Gaming. Veteran-owned and operated, Misty Mountain is one of the largest dice companies in the world. They offer the widest selection of metal, gemstone, and glass dice combined. For yourself, that special role player in your life, or your favorite podcast hosts. Just saying. Look for their booth at your next local comic, anime, or gaming convention, or find their products at mistymountaingaming.com. Okay, on with the show. Excuse me there, old sport.
Oh, hello, old bean.
I was told there was a shindig happening around these parts this fine evening.
Well, so there is, my dear chap. In fact, we're getting ready for the first session of our new Dungeons & Dragons campaign. Real glad you made the scene.
Of course. I hear these soirees are killer diller. Wouldn't miss it for the world.
Well, don't just stand there whistling Dixie. Come on into my pad and join us for session 0. It's just about to start.
Now, hold on just a minute there, fella. I thought this was the first session.
Well, sure it is. I said as much.
I thought you did, and then you said...
Glad you made the scene.
After that.
Sure it is. I said as much.
But before that.
Come on in and join us for session 0. It's just about to start.
Yes, that part. So this isn't a session.
Of course it is.
But it's worthless?
No, it's not worthless at all. Why would you say such a thing?
Because 0 is worthless. If something has no value, then it's worth nothing. It's worth 0.
Well now, session 0 isn't worthless at all. In fact, that's just what we call the first session.
You call it session 0?
Yes.
Not session 1?
No, of course not. That comes later.
How much later?
Well, the next time we meet.
So the second session?
That's right.
And you can't think of anything better to call that second session?
No, nothing comes to mind.
Nothing comes to mind?
No, sorry, sport, nothing comes to mind.
Listen, chum, I don't want to be a wet rag, but I heard on the grapevine that what was going on here was real gas. Now, I'm no yuck, but I feel like you're yanking my chain, giving me the business. Now, what's the skinny here? Should I just beat feet?
Well, slow down there, son. Don't flip your wig. That scuttlebutt you got there was the real word from the bird. Just come on in, sit a spell, see how things go, and you'll have it made in the shade.
Okay there, champ. I'll come in and I'll have a peep. But if this session 0 of yours is just bupkis, I'm gonna split.
That's the spirit, slugger. Come on, right this way.
Hello again, friends and adventurers. Welcome back to another episode of Bardic Twinspiration. It's me, once again, the D&D wannabe, Rob, here with my brother Steve.
That's right, he hasn't gotten rid of me yet.
Try, though I might.
He's started doing all sorts of other content, and I still have yet to get my invite.
Oh, man. This week, we are here to discuss a very important, perhaps integral part of your campaign. In fact, it should be item 1 on the to-do list. Ironically, item 1 is called Session 0. So, Steve, what is Session 0?
Session 0 is a gathering of the DM and all of the potential players for a campaign before the campaign actually begins to discuss some of the logistics of the game that they're going to be enjoying together for the next couple of weeks, couple of months, couple of years, sometimes, and set expectations for the time that they're going to be spending together and the campaign that they're going to be running for the players.
Sounds important.
The reason it's important to go ahead and establish all of these, I don't want to say ground rules, but to kind of make sure that everyone is on the same page before the campaign begins, is to make sure that no one is unwittingly set up for failure, so that everyone is working towards the same goals, and so that everyone can have more fun through that mutual cooperation.
Right. You and I have both worked management jobs and service industry jobs, and we both know that managing expectations is so important when it comes to satisfaction. And since this is a group event, this is a cooperative game that involves you and several other people, making sure that people's expectations are properly set can ensure that they are properly met.
Look anywhere you want online. The idea of a Session Zero is extremely popular, and everyone generally agrees that it's a good idea. It's been around for a long time. Even Wizards of the Coast has finally recognized that a Session Zero is important, and they finally actually got around to writing it up in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, which is just one more reason why you should buy that source book.
Yeah, the individual members of the company, I'm sure, have been proponents of Session Zero for quite some time. But they're finally publishing material about it, even if it was only a few short paragraphs. It's nice to give the nod to something that is so important, so vital to having a great experience with Dungeons & Dragons.
If you think about it, inviting someone to play Dungeons & Dragons with you is essentially saying to them, "Hi, would you possibly consider spending the next 4 to 200 hours this year playing make-believe math with me?" It's a pretty big ask to spend that much time together, especially doing a singular pursuit with a group of people. And it really helps to make sure that everyone understands all of the who's, what's, where's, when's, and how's of what that entails before they sign on.
And sometimes whys.
Oh, did I leave off why? Oh, I am ashamed. We already talked about why you should play D&D in our Session Zero episode.
Ah, that's right. I guess that's what that was.
In our episode 0, right. It's where we set expectations for the podcast. It was clever in a way that probably most people didn't pick up on. But as I said before, the main goal of a Session Zero is to discuss everyone's expectations and make sure that they align with one another so that no one has buyer's remorse on Session 10.
All right, so you gave us that little list, the who's, the what's, the where's, the when's, the how's. Let's start with the who's.
So the who's are going to be, of course, the participants in the game, the players, and I do include the DM when I say this, and I will not for the rest of the episode. But the DM and the players, there we go. The DM and the players are the people who are going to be involved. Usually a Session Zero is something that everyone does together as a group event, although I have seen people mitigate this by having conversations with each player individually. And I've also seen a lot of this handled over Discord, but it really is preferred, if possible, to get everyone together in a room or maybe on a Zoom call or something where you can have kind of a roundtable discussion and address everyone's concerns simultaneously.
Sure. When I was trying to set up a campaign with a bunch of people that I'd never met before, complete strangers online, having a Session Zero to discuss the expectations for the campaign was kind of the first hurdle, in a way, that I set for my players. Because if you're going to have trouble showing up to my Session Zero, you're probably going to be having trouble showing up to all sessions beyond that. So attendance to Session Zero was a qualification for participating in my campaign.
Now, I know I just said that it's better if you get everyone together at once, but I know that for our most recent campaign, our current ongoing one, you decided to get together with each player individually. Tell me a little bit about, was that just a scheduling issue, or was that something that you wanted to do that way? How intentional are you about things? Did you settle for individual conversations, or was that something that you were going for?
For that particular campaign, that was by design. The characters were coming together without having any previous knowledge of one another, and I wanted their backstories and their histories, motivations, and goals as characters to be mysterious. And I wanted to reveal them fairly quickly but enigmatically to the rest of the party so that I could draw in the interest of the other players at the table on behalf of the other players' characters. But I did have the advantage that everyone in that campaign had just finished playing a different campaign together. Everyone knew one another. We had kind of a set day that we could all play and a set time when we were all available. And some of the who's who of a Session Zero had already been gotten out of the way with, and we were already acclimated with each other's style of play and expectations for the game.
And I will say that plan worked out really well, and we all were very invested in each other's story arcs and backstories that we didn't know anything about because we teased all of them in our session 1, thanks to the session 0. But let's come back to that whole thing about crafting backstories and whether or not they should be interconnected, because you did something that was very unique and effective by way of your experience that you were able to accomplish that. But it's probably not what most people are looking for at the start of a campaign, and it is actually a great thing to tackle in session 0. And let's talk instead, currently, about the fact that, yes, you were running for a group who all knew each other because we had just finished my campaign that I was running for y'all, but that may not always be the case.
You made it look like so much fun that I just decided I had to run for the same people.
Yeah.
And show them what, good DMing was like.
Yeah, there you go. That's probably fair. So let's talk about maybe what you should do if you're getting together with a new group of players, or a group of players that you know but that don't necessarily know one another. Session 0 is a great time to have a bit of a meet and greet.
Sure, Dungeons & Dragons is kind of an intimate experience, isn't it? It's a safe and inclusive space where we're all doing something that's a little bit awkward but a lot of fun. And you have to feel comfortable with the other people in order to get the most out of the game. So Session 0 is a great time to shake hands and find out what you have in common with one another, share some Mountain Dew and Doritos or another social lubricant of choice.
It is an intimate experience, and that's why whenever we get ready to play D&D, I dim the lights a little bit, light some scented candles, and put on some, what's the name of that musician?
Smooth jazz? Wait a minute. Marvin Gaye?
Put on some Lionel Richie.
Oh, I did not expect Lionel Richie. I would have put money on people other than Lionel Richie. At least you didn't say Whitesnake.
Bob the World Builder is a content creator on YouTube, and I've seen a lot of his stuff here and there, but he has a lot to say about running a good Session 0. And I would refer you to him if you feel like you still need to hear anything more about the subject after we get done discussing it.
Alternate perspectives can be good.
But one of the things that he mentions is that before you can expect your characters to bond, you should prioritize bonding the players to one another. So he has a couple of icebreaker questions that he recommends that you go through, or maybe a little icebreaker game that you can play, just to make sure that everyone is comfortable with one another. Because, again, y'all are going to be spending a lot of time together.
Anyone that you're going to be spending a lot of time with, regardless of the scenario or the occasion, you want to enjoy. You don't want spending time with someone at the table to be something that you dread or even that you don't look forward to. So getting a group of people together that mesh well and that get along and can cooperate is very important. You guys are going to be a team. Team building activities are, I don't want to say in order, but they might be in order.
Yeah, it's important that you get along with the people that you're playing with. I think we mentioned it in a previous episode, but I mean, do you really want to play D&D with a bunch of people you don't get along with?
Some things just ain't worth it, man.
Once you've made sure that everyone is comfortable with one another, it's time to lay down the law. And I don't mean that in some sort of really grim or serious way, but D&D is a social game. It's a huge time commitment. And you really need to be respectful of the other people at the table and their time and the effort that they have put into coming together to participate in this activity every week, every month, however often you get together. And that's where the social contract comes in. Now, if you don't know what the social contract is, go back and listen to our last episode. But essentially, it's a very important set of things that should be discussed prior to the game starting. And it has a lot to do with logistics and respect.
The social contract of any tabletop role-playing game is an unspoken agreement that should probably become a spoken agreement just for the sake of clarity and managing those expectations that guarantees and assures the respect of the people participating in the game. Tasha's Cauldron of Everything has a few paragraphs about the official Wizards of the Coast social contract, which basically revolves around that same premise, that the Dungeon Master respects the players respect the Dungeon Master, and the players respect one another. And if at any time that trust is broken and anyone feels disrespected, that they may be invited to leave.
You know, at the time that we recorded the episode on the social contract, I actually didn't know that this was addressed in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, to my chagrin. But I did go through and read those pages, those articles within the book, and I think that they are a great and necessary start.
Yes.
To any session 0. Let's make sure that you cover the things that they discuss, and then you can add on to that as much as you feel necessary, which, again, last episode we discussed Rob's social contract, which added on a great deal.
I don't know if it was a great deal, but there is so little in the standard social contract that I think everyone should probably add on to it a touch.
Right. Like, the one that they put in the book is very bare bones, very basic. You add on what you need to run your table after that. But since we have already discussed that at length in our last episode, let's go ahead and move on to the next major topic, which is safety and boundaries.
This is my priority 1 for a session 0, and I think this is probably the most important thing you can do when you're getting together before a campaign starts.
I know a lot of people will agree with you on that for sure.
To put it delicately, there are topics, situations, and subject matter that you or other players at your table may be sensitive or adverse to. There are things that we are uncomfortable dealing with in real life that, if they should work their way into our fun, safe, role-playing fantasy space, could spoil the fun that that space is supposed to provide and turn it from something that is comfortable, enjoyable, and safe into something that is actively stressful, anxiety-inducing, or even traumatizing.
One of the harder parts of being a DM is crafting a story that is going to be compelling and that is going to feel real. If you have a villain, they are going to have to do some pretty reprehensible things. And there are definitely some things that could be, I hate to use the word, but that could be triggering for some players, because it could have some parallels to their real life that they are not comfortable dealing with in an idealized fantasy space. For a lot of people, D&D is an escape from certain aspects that they would rather not deal with in real life, and to have that appear in their ideal fantasy world can completely prevent them from having the fun that they sat down to have.
It's essential to remember that the other players and the dungeon master around the table with you are people first. And they are people who probably have vastly different real-life experiences than you. And they come to the game with unique opinions, issues, expectations, and concerns. It is so important to be aware of those things so that you cannot accidentally harm someone or distress them unintentionally.
What might just be describing a villain doing something bad to you could parallel someone's real life experience in a way that you don't realize and be traumatic for them. There are some really major things like violence to children, spousal abuse, molestation, or it could even be something simpler. Like, I know there are some people who become incredibly uncomfortable when they are being ridiculed or condescended to, or when they are presented with a particular phobia.
Right. I love playing upon the fears of my players, putting them in situations that make them a little uncomfortable and worried, but never more so than a horror movie or a podcast may do. I don't want to accidentally stumble upon someone's pathological fears and cause them to enter a state of actual terror.
Right. I know that we previously had played in a campaign where a girl was legitimately terrified, and I don't mean scared, I mean legitimately terrified by the concept of undead.
Yes.
And so, thankfully, at the beginning of the campaign, she made it very clear to you that she was not going to be okay if our party had to fight undead.
And because I knew this, that was something that we avoided. Knocking out undead really does knock out about a quarter of the monster manual. But it forced me to be a little bit creative. It caused me to push my limits as a dungeon master, and it allowed someone who otherwise may not have been able to participate in a game of Dungeons and Dragons, my favorite hobby, to be able to give the game a try.
Now, let's say that you have someone who you are not as familiar with, who is not comfortable walking up to you at the beginning of the campaign or during session 0 and saying, "Hi, my name is Steve, and I am petrified by the concept of zombies." Let's say that we're talking about one of those more real traumas that someone has experienced, and they may not be comfortable sharing that with you right off the bat. Some tables use the concept of the X card. It's out there online if you want to go and look it up. It's a little yellow X on a card and a little red X on a card to convey your degree of discomfort in a current situation. Non-verbally, without interrupting the flow of the game, and without telling someone about your own previous trauma, you kind of slide one of these cards out. It's kind of like in soccer where a yellow is, kind of a proceed with caution. Yellow's kind of a warning. And a red is, okay, we need to pull out. We need to move on. This is becoming incredibly uncomfortable for me. And it's a way for someone to non-verbally address their concern without interrupting anything or without having to explain why that is the case for them.
If you do have someone at the table who is sensitive to particular topics in these ways, it's important to have some signal, some sign, either discreet or overt, that will allow them to communicate when they have ceased to have fun, when they are uncomfortable, and that needs to be established before the game ever starts. If someone is not comfortable disclosing their topical boundaries openly, perhaps consider having them be submitted anonymously in some way, so that everyone at the table knows what topics are off the table, but nobody knows who or why.
Yeah, like maybe if you meet in person, then everyone, writes something on an index card and drops it in a hat or something, and then the DM goes over them. So that way it's not apparent who is uninterested in dealing with that certain topic at a time.
And it may be that there's no holds barred at your table, because all of your players are comfortable with virtually everything, and you might be that fortunate. Or it may be that you are not comfortable dealing with something that this particular campaign is going to be addressing, or that everyone else at the table is interested in pursuing. And Session 0 is a great time to know that you need to gracefully bow out or excuse yourself before anyone invests too much time in something like this.
I wasn't really a big fan of the X card idea when I first heard of it, but the more I think about it, the more important I feel it is for a group that is not already comfortable with one another. Like if you're adding in new people, playing with some strangers, or especially if you do like you did that one time and find an entirely new group of players online and you have no idea what their past experience is, and they are definitely not comfortable sharing all of this with someone that they have not actually even met yet.
Mm-hmm.
That sort of thing becomes increasingly important, and I become an increasingly big fan of it. Moving on from that, let's talk some logistics. Like, if you're going to play a game, everyone needs to know when and where it's going to happen.
Right. Dungeons and Dragons is a game that you have to be present to play. I mean, it seems obvious, but the way some people are sometimes, you'd be surprised. Knowing that you can all get together, virtually or in person, at the same time, across different time zones or in different cities, to be able to play the game for the regularly scheduled amount of time is pretty important. That's something to go ahead and get out of the way.
Right. Session 0 is the perfect time to discuss how often the game is going to take place, and at what time and on what day. The number one killer of D&D games is lack of consistency. And if everyone is not on the same page about the schedule, then the D&D game is going to have a very hard time continuing. Make a precise time, not a general time, and be consistent about adhering to it. If you make concessions and you change the day from Friday to Wednesday this week, that's going to imply that there's a flexibility there, that you may not always be willing to uphold. You might end up in a situation, well, we changed the schedule for the paladin to do this. Why can't we change the situation for me to do this? It's better to say, we're going to play at this time on this day, or we're going to skip that week.
Presumably, by virtue of everyone being there for a session 0, there is a time when you are all free. And perhaps that's a time that you are regularly all free. And that should probably be when you have your game. If you do need to change it for any reason, that should be a group decision. Just like scheduling session 0 was probably a group decision.
So I have gone ahead and made my topics for session 0 for the campaign whenever I eventually run it. My session 0 is already laid out. And one of the things that I discuss is when we agree upon a time, that is when we will play. And if at least 50% of the players can show up, play will continue. And it also goes ahead and details what will happen to the characters of the players who are not present, which can be another potential point of contention. You know, some people don't want the DM to run their players because they feel like it's kind of adversarial. Some people don't want other players to mess with their character. So some people are more comfortable with the character being written out. I have been in campaigns where all 3 of those were the case, and I've personally been fine with all of them because everyone has had a lot of mutual respect and no one has gone off and killed my character if I couldn't make a session. But it is good to go ahead and set those expectations, and consistency of your schedule is extremely important. D&D is a social game, and making time for it needs to be a priority if you're going to continue to participate.
You know, whether or not the Dungeon Master runs a absent player's character, or the fellow players do, or whether play is suspended for that week. Because some campaigns just don't function when the entire cast is not present. And sometimes the Dungeon Master in the group decides that the show must go on. Regardless, knowing in advance what will happen if a player can't make it, or if the Dungeon Master can't make it. Well, if the Dungeon Master can't make it, the game just doesn't happen. But knowing in advance the plan for such contingencies is a great topic to put in stone in session 0.
Right. Go ahead and set that expectation. If it's going to be a problem for someone, have them go ahead and address their concern. This might not be the campaign for them because they're not available when everyone else is. But rather than trying to work your schedule around them, err on the side of consistency for the sake of your campaign's longevity. So, with that, I think we've covered pretty much all of the logistics of the game. Would you agree?
Well, we've covered the who and the what and the when.
So let's move on to the how. Let's talk about the campaign itself.
Yay, the reason we're here.
We're not just players sitting around a table anymore. We are the creators of characters whose lives exist in the DM's campaign setting, whether it's his own homebrew one or whether it's from a module. We need to know a couple of things about that setting in order to do so correctly and respectfully.
Right. If you're using a published campaign setting, maybe all you need to let the players know is which setting that is. The official Dungeons & Dragons settings of Greyhawk and the Forgotten Realms and Eberron have decades of lore online.
Tons of stuff.
Really too much to consume, but everything that you find out there about those settings is true. It won't take your players long to go Google search some information and find something that they can latch onto to base their character around or their backstory around.
And a module is going to give you a lot of detail about the setting, and you can just disperse a little of that information to the players to kind of give them an idea of what the campaign's going to be like.
But when a dungeon master is bringing their baby, their world, their campaign setting into the mix, there's probably a lot of information that the players need to know for the sake of their characters that the players would just have no way of knowing without it being told to them.
I'm sure every DM out there probably has a campaign Bible at the ready, but this is not what you're looking to drop on your players at Session 0. The first thing that I contend that you should address with them is any setting-specific exclusions.
Right. Stuff that the books that you have handed to your players or that the players may own or that the players may expect from having played in other campaigns of Dungeons & Dragons that will not be true here.
Right. Some big ones off the top of my head are things like, if you're doing an Elder Scrolls-inspired world, there are no dwarves anymore.
Right.
So a dwarven player race would be off the table. If you were doing a Middle-earth style campaign, there are only 5 wizards in all of Middle-earth. And they may or may not be available for player character selection.
Right. Let's take some of the 5e published adventures. For instance, the Tomb of Annihilation campaign. The premise of the entire campaign, the conceit of the story, is that resurrection magic doesn't work anymore. And everyone that has previously been resurrected or brought back to life by magic is dying again. So if that's going to be a thing at the start of the campaign, good to let your characters know so that they can not dump that constitution stat so that everybody can play clerics with healing spells and that nobody invests time and resources picking spells that aren't going to do crap.
Right. Take your campaign setting, for example. I know that Dragonborn is a selectable player race, and I have been one. But when I selected to play a Dragonborn, you told me, hey, just so you know, you are a dying breed. Totally fine if you want to play one, but just know that as a Dragonborn, if you walk into a tavern, it is likely that you are the first Dragonborn that all of these people have seen.
Right. It's one of the major events in my world's history that the Dragonborn homeland was invaded by armies of the Abyss, and their race was wiped to near extinction. So being a Dragonborn is significant, and you need to know about that day, about those years and what the Dragonborn have gone through since then, if you intend to accurately portray one in my world.
And there are also some other thematic considerations, like how you said being a sorcerer is particularly significant in your world. Let's say that you were doing a wizarding world inspired campaign, and magic is either something that you're born with or not. It's a skill upon which you can improve, but it is not something that you can create if you did not previously exist from birth.
Or take Star Wars. Whether or not you were born Force sensitive is a huge deal. Of course, we typically talk Dungeons & Dragons, but the Fantasy Flight Star Wars games, every potentially Force sensitive race has a die rolled for them at the start of the game so that the game master of that particular campaign secretly knows who has Jedi or Sith potential from Session 0.
Neat. I know that I had mentioned previously a campaign idea where there was no divine magic in the world, and it was all arcane until the player character showed up. Little thematic things like that can add a lot of depth to your world, but if there is a sweeping change to the existing theme of Dungeons & Dragons that you want to make to increase the immersion or the uniqueness of the world which you have created, maybe go ahead and mention it.
This is also a really good time to talk about the theme of the campaign.
Yes, it is.
By which I mean the thematic setting. When I ran my campaign online for those kids from around the country, I asked them what kind of game that they wanted me to run. I gave them a set of options, and they selected they would like to play an Arabian Nights style campaign. Out in the desert, fighting jackalwares and lamia and genies. And we did that, and it was a great time. But it was something that we agreed upon before the campaign ever started, and everyone got to create characters that they felt would be interesting in that kind of scenario.
Right. There's a bunch of different styles of campaign that you can run. To name a few, there is political intrigue, there is Rage Against the Evil King, there is Quest for the Holy Grail, there are dungeon crawls, there are pub crawls.
If you're going to be an all-barred touring rock troupe, this is the time to decide that.
Which sounds fantastic. One of Critical Role's offshoot campaigns they do for like a 1 or 2 shot is set in the Elder Scrolls campaign setting. And the beginning sees the players doing basically a tavern management sim. That was actually pretty funny. That was actually pretty good. I mean, they
Was
went
that
off and did
Blackwood?
other stuff after that. Yes, it was Blackwood. Anyone who hasn't seen it can look it up on YouTube. But I have heard stories of some people who got just like engrossed in the economics of running a small town and dealing with the problems that come up, be they political or military. If that's the sort of thing that you guys want to run, then cool. Honestly, does not sound that bad.
But it would be great to know that going in.
Right, who cares about what's going on in the wide world? We care about the little hamlet of Costello and the problems that they deal with on a day-to-day basis. We care about whether or not the baker's going to be able to open up his shop next week. If he is, we're dealing with plague, we're dealing with goblin
always.
raiders, we're dealing with the fact that someone in town might be a werewolf, and it's just, a game where it never leaves that one little city. Sounds great. But some people might be looking for the rage against the evil king and leading a rebellion. And those two people are going to have fun in very different games, and you can only really probably run one of those two at a time.
This would also be a great time to discuss the tone that you hope to achieve with your campaign. This is mostly up to the dungeon master in terms of being able to set the tone and the kind of elements that they're going to be introducing into the game. But player buy-in can have such an impact on maintaining that particular aesthetic.
You as the DM might be trying to run a gothic horror theme a la Curse of Strahd, and one of your players might be Farthing Pennywhistle, the bard whose goal is to sing in every tavern from one coast to the other.
No shirt, no shoes, no problem.
And that might be great, or it might be entirely counterproductive. I think Puff and Forrest had a video where someone was running Curse of Strahd for him, and he had a lot of little ridiculous characters that were being run by the players, and it sounds like that worked out great for their group. But I imagine there are some DMs out there who that would have really frustrated.
Or maybe even other players at the table who were hoping to get something else out of that campaign when they heard that they were going to get to play in a Curse of Strahd campaign. D&D is such a versatile medium. Mm-hmm. It can be hilarious. It can be dramatic. It can be tense. It can be exciting. It can be heart-pounding, or it could be passionate. But knowing the sort of game that you are trying to create together from the outset can go a long way towards making it happen. And it's possible that this could change over time. But having everyone kind of agree on something will set you off on the right foot and get you off to a good start.
It's entirely possible that your party could have a great time with analogs for Spartacus, Christian Grey, and Beaver Cleaver.
Ooh, that's a pull.
But maybe not the most cohesive group. I mean, you do you, but maybe y'all would want to know that walking in.
To some people, being different is good. To some people, being in conflict is bad. So making sure that everyone is on the same page, even if they're on the same page about being on different pages, is crucial.
Speaking of trying to be on the same page, there is also the matter of whether or not the DM is trying to tell a story and allow the players to experience, or whether the DM is trying to give them a world to run around in and just see what they do with it.
Like we said, D&D is a very versatile medium. You can have Dungeons & Dragons be the equivalent of Grand Theft Auto, where you're dropped in the middle of this enormous sandbox where anything can happen, and you try your best to make everything happen. Or it could swing the other way, and there could be a very interesting and linear story where you still have great agency, but within the confines of what is applicable to the tale.
So, two different ends of the spectrum as far as video games that I have played before, both of which I enjoy supremely, or at least did the last time I played them. When I was younger and Kingdom Hearts 2 first came out, I played the crap out of that thing, and I thought it was fantastic. But, you can go to, like, Disney World A or Disney World B, and you can kind of mix up the order a little bit, but you're going to hit very specific story beats. It's a very kind of procedural storyline. I'm not a big fan of the term railroad, but it's basically a railroad-style game. I'm going to have to use that term because it's very familiar to people in this hobby. On the other hand, the Elder Scrolls is a very sandboxy style game, like Skyrim or Oblivion. There is a main story to be enjoyed, but you could play hundreds of hours in the game before you get to it.
Yeah, you can complete any number of quests and missions, achieve any number of player levels and milestones before ever going to High Hrothgar and realizing that, hey, you're the Dragonborn, and you have a destiny.
Oh, hi, old dudes. What are you doing up here? Oh, you've been waiting for me.
Did y'all see that troll on the way here?
Crazy, right? Yeah, and honestly, that's what I did, because when I tried to go up there as like a level 2 or 3 or whatever I was, that frost troll on the way to High Hrothgar just kicked my poo in. And
Straight down the mountain.
So I did a lot of side quests before I'm like, oh yeah, wasn't there something I was supposed to be doing? Greybeards somewhere?
I ran away from that troll and accidentally walked off a cliff, and I managed to make it safely down the mountainside, and then remembered all the steps it took for me to get up to where that troll was. Just, nah, not worth it. I think there's a cave over here. I'm going to go in that instead.
And that's another thing that you could discuss. Like, where is the adventure going to take place? And I don't mean the setting. I mean, like, where in the setting does adventure happen? I can think of a couple of fantasy settings where the campaign would start in a city, and everything outside that city is a danger zone. You can think of somewhere the whole world is safe, except for this one particular dungeon. And if you go into that dungeon, then you are taking your life into your own hands. But there are huge rewards waiting inside for the people that do.
Sure, and if you have a large and developed setting, but your campaign is only going to take place within an isolated corner of it, that's something to be upfront about as well. For instance, I have a pretty large campaign world that I enjoy having my stories take you on a tour through, and you have reasons to go and visit these different countries and these different kingdoms and palaces and seaports and the like. But I also really like sticking you in a corner of it, or even in a single city, and giving you enough adventure in that place so that you don't really have a reason to leave. If I was going to play a game of Dungeons and Dragons, or Call of Cthulhu, or whatever have you, in the city of Las Vegas, I'm not going to go out into the wastes of Nevada when I could be experiencing Las Vegas. Everything I want is there. All the adventure is there.
Right. A lot of the stories that take place in the Call of Cthulhu games, be they board games, role-playing games, what have you, take place in the city of Arkham, Massachusetts. So establishing the where within your campaign setting is very important.
This could be particularly important if you're going to have a ranger in the party, something with a favored terrain, or a druid who's going to have to pick a particular circle that they were a part of, something that's linked geographically. You don't want to have a ranger who is from the mountains and that is their favored terrain.
If the campaign's going to take place on a sea voyage.
Right, it's not going to be as fun to play that character if they never get to use their thing. So it's nice if you know going in that that's not going to be a thing, or that one type of terrain is going to be coming up a lot, and you know you have a player interested in that type of character, to go ahead and give them the inside scoop.
Yeah, every time that I picked a ranger, I had a quick conversation with the DM just to say, hey, if I pick dragons, are we ever going to fight a dragon? You know, I'm like, you don't have to tell me the things I'm going to fight on a day-to-day basis, but I don't want to pick something that you're never going to run.
Right.
This is also a good time to discuss things like the level of technology in your world, you know.
Yeah.
I know it's a big hot button for some people, but firearms were invented before plate armor was, and yet a lot of people really don't like to have firearms in their world. This would be a good time to address whether or not you're going to be doing that sort of thing too. It's also a great time to talk about the prevalence of magic in your world, because if you're playing in a high fantasy, high magic sort of setting where teleportation is fairly commonplace, then that's going to have some different implications, and it's going to make a difference whether people want to play spellcasty races or whether they'd prefer not to.
Yeah, the availability of magic to the common person has an incredible effect on the kinds of characters that your players will play and the kind of NPCs that they will meet and the kind of items that they will have access to during the game.
Ooh, items is a really good point. Take, say, the MCU, Marvel Cinematic Universe, the Infinity Stones that pretty much the whole movies were about collecting. It was a very rare magical item. There are only a few of them in the entire universe. And then you go to Loki, where people are using them as paperweights. And it just shook Loki to realize that. The prevalence of high-powered magical items in your campaign can have a lot of far-reaching implications. If everyone and their mother has a Holy Avenger hanging over their hearth, that would be really cool, but it's probably worth mentioning.
Sure, take a look at, it's been a while since we pressed the anime button, the setting in My Hero Academia. In that world, almost everybody has a magical superpower, even though it's not a magical superpower. That's kind of what it is. And Deku, the main character, is significant because he doesn't. And if you're going to play a wizard and you want to be special for being a wizard, but everybody else around you can cast magic, it's going to be hard to be special in that kind of world. Also, probably going to want to pick Counterspell if everybody else around you knows how to use magic. But similarly, the availability of magic can affect so many other things. How do you get from location A to location B? How often you can expect to find magical loot? The value of a magical item is severely decreased if they're easy to come by. It affects the whole stinking economy, man. The law of supply and demand.
If your campaign is going to take place within a particular country, it might do to have a very brief discussion of kind of what the political machinations are that govern it. For instance, because this ties into the magic discussion as well, one of the countries within your campaign setting, Estria, is a magocracy, which is to say that it is governed by the magic users and their caste system is determined by how much magical potential you have. You don't have to go into the whole world history or anything, but it would probably do to say, hey, just so you know, we're playing in Estria. Estria is run by a council of wizards, and anyone who uses magic is automatically better than people who don't.
Right. It's also significant to know that if you are from there, that may color the way that you view people in other cultures that you may or may not visit. Because magic is so prevalent there, everywhere else seems like it's in the Dark Ages by comparison. And everyone else is treating you like a normal person when you are expecting to be treated as better. Little things like this can really put a unique twist on a character and give a player something new and unique to roleplay that was probably not in the last campaign they participated in.
In the campaign that you're currently running, I am playing a sorcerer who was from Estria. So you told me when I created that character, just so you know, your culture that you were raised in exalts the people who can use magic, but not you, because you're an anomaly. But now that you have left that country, would you say that you have maintained that impression that you were raised around, or would you say that's something that you have grown away from? Because that was the going assumption of everyone that you grew up around for the first X years of your life.
Which you pretty handily decided to abandon, as I recall.
It lasted a couple of sessions until I realized how prevalent magic was in the outside world. At any rate, we've established previously that I am a planner, and I feel like my inclination as a dungeon master during a session 0 would be to just tell my players everything about my world.
Oh no, you don't want to do that.
But that would take a lot of time. It would probably bore a couple of people to sleep, if not death. So try to be concise. Try to tell them the things that are going to be immediately relevant. There's plenty to discuss in session 0 without a massive lore dump. Tell them the things that they're going to need to know right off the bat, like you did when you explained to us what a divine champion is. We needed to know how significant that guy was because we were about to watch him die in front of us. My recommendation to the listeners, and what I'm going to try personally to do whenever I do run my own session 0, is to try to give someone a Star Wars prologue. I am really impressed by how much Star Wars gets across in those 3 paragraphs at the beginning of their movies that tells you what's going on in the galaxy and where you're picking up at the start of the movie. See if you can't boil down the need to know stuff to about 3 paragraphs, because there will be plenty of time to discuss the rest later. And if your players want to know more, then great, you can go ahead and tell them as much as they want, because it may be relevant to their character creation process, but don't just force it down their throats.
Right. The player who's going to run Luke Skywalker needs to know a little bit about Uncle Owen, Aunt Beru, and growing up on Tatooine. The character who is going to be playing Han Solo needs to know a little bit about Jabba the Hutt and what Lando Calrissian did to him back in the day, and how to speak Wookiee. But all that everyone needs to know is probably a pretty short list detailing the most recent and most vital events in their characters' lifetimes.
Right. When I made Salem, we had probably a 2-hour discussion about what life was like in Estria and how things had gone since I left there. But we had that as a one-on-one conversation because the time that we dedicated to Session 0 was meant to be more respectful of the other players and giving them the information that was going to be relevant to all of us, not me specifically. We saved that for a separate interaction.
And let's face it, that 2 hours was pretty indulgent of us.
You always have to be when I'm making a character,
well,
it seems.
Again, a dungeon master loves nothing better than talking about the world they made.
So, in our Session 0, we have discussed the need to know things about joining a game of D&D. We have met everyone and hopefully become comfortable with one another. We have discussed the logistics, the time, the place, the frequency of the game. We've talked about the campaign setting and the tone and theme that we're going for. Now it's time to get to the good stuff. The DM and the players making some characters. It's where the rubber meets the road. Players are excited to jump in and start filling out their character sheet. And they need you to give them a quick overview before they get too far into it about what is and is not allowed in your game.
This is probably going to be the most fun you have during a Session 0. And frankly, this may not happen during the Session 0. But if you have time for it, this can be one of the better bonding experiences you can have as a group. But in almost every game, and certainly in every one that I have played in, and definitely every one that I have run, there has always been some limitations, however few, on what sort of characters you can create.
Right. The basics are what we discussed before. Is there anything in the player's handbook that is off limits for a particular campaign-specific reason, such as the absence of dwarves, or the fact that sorcerers don't exist in your world for one reason or another? After you get past the basics or the PHB, then it goes on to the rest of the source books, because there are a ton. Even modules have races and subclass options that they offer as well. So it's important to determine what, if any, additional source books are going to be on the table, so to speak.
My rule of thumb, which has made me unpopular at times with certain players, has been that I will allow anything that Wizards of the Coast has published in any of my games. It's been rigorously play-tested, it's made by the guys who designed the rest of the game, and they have the rest of the game in mind when they created it. They have experience in balancing a game and keeping the mechanics consistent. Unearthed Arcana, which is designed by those same people and is admittedly an unfinished product, is typically not allowed. I also don't allow homebrew from outside of myself into the games. Races and classes that other people have designed don't always fit the theme of my world. They're not always consistent and balanced with other races and classes that are out there, and some of them are just poorly conceived and don't make a lot of sense to me.
Personally, I've played some of the Unearthed Arcana things, and I enjoy being part of that playtest group. So if it was my table, I probably would allow all of those things.
You did allow one of your players in the one campaign that you ran to use what would later become the Rune Knight.
Right, and she played that character, and they were very obviously powerful, probably above and beyond what any of the other players were, but it didn't really bother me too much, and I got to have a little bit of additional satisfaction in, hey, we're helping the people who make our game make it a little bit better in the future. And I did this all at the expense of a couple extra enemies dying a little quicker than I had anticipated.
So, if there's going to be any limitations or any additions to what the players might expect in terms of their options for creating their character, it's good to make those clear up front before anybody gets their heart set on anything or before anyone begins to plan a direction for their character so that they know what their options are.
As a person who really likes to make optimized characters, I also appreciate knowing what sort of ability score method we're going to be using. If we are going to be rolling for stats, if we're going to be using a point buy calculator, or if we're going to be taking the standard array, I don't care, but that is definitely something that needs to be stated before I waste a bunch of time making a character that is incompatible at the table.
Some people care a lot about this particular detail, how the ability scores are generated, to the point that it may prohibit them from enjoying the game or participating in the group if the method that they prefer is not on the table.
For sure.
So, best to go ahead and be upfront with that and make sure that everyone is in accord before the game ever starts.
Right. I'm personally one of those people who has very strong opinions about this. And I'm not going to say that if the table uses a method of ability score generation that is not my favorite, I'm not going to play. But it may impact things like what class I play or what race I pick, because it may have to make up for, say, a low roll. And I am inclined to roll low.
This is also a good time for the Dungeon Master and the players to make sure that they are on the same page about character advancement. Whether you're going to be using milestone or whether you're going to gain experience and at what rate, just so that everyone can know what to expect and what to plan for. This definitely has an impact on things like missing a session and whether that will be a big deal or not so big a deal, and whether or not falling behind is an option in this campaign. That can really get in the way of some people's fun. So, best to go ahead and agree on something at the start.
Definitely. It's also worth mentioning that a lot of the rules that we assume are standard in D&D are technically optional. While one could argue that all the rules in D&D are optional, and many Dungeons & Dragons designers have actually done so, I'm thinking specifically about things like taking feats instead of ability score increases, or the ability to multi-class. Those are listed as optional things that should be discussed with the DM before taking advantage of them, and when better to do that than during session 0?
Sure. Inspiration from the DM is technically an optional rule. One that I use in all my games because I love it. I think it's great. But dungeon masters like Matthew Mercer do not use inspiration in the campaign.
Right. Big change when they went from Critical Role Campaign 2 to Exandria Unlimited, and Abria Iyengar started handing it out like candy. I had almost forgotten that was a thing as far as that show was concerned until Exandria Unlimited came along.
And for instance, I infamously don't use flanking in my games. That is a unpopular opinion that I'm willing to discuss with anyone who wishes to.
You mean that thing from Pathfinder where, like, if two characters are on opposite sides of an enemy, they can create a situation where they both roll at advantage. It's basically pack tactics for everyone.
Yeah, of course, it wasn't advantage back in the Pathfinder days or in previous editions, but I don't do flanking in my games. And some people are very used to having flanking in games and may expect it. And I want to be upfront about it so that they're not unpleasantly surprised the first time that we roll initiative and they stand on the opposite side of an enemy from their friend.
Sure. It's also a good time to talk about any rules that you have felt like changing, such as flanking or not. I know that I've played for one DM who retooled Healing Word as a touch spell. I know that I played for someone who made a couple of changes to Spirit Guardians. I played for a DM who completely omitted Spirit Guardians. And if you're playing a druid because you hope to be able to get that spell, by the time you get to that level is probably not the best time to talk about it. Go ahead and lay it out before the character gets created.
This is also a great time for the players to agree that they're all going to have a theme for their characters. Like we mentioned, that group of touring glam rock bards, or all members of the same dwarven family, or the disenfranchised youth from a particular city. If there's going to be a theme in terms of the players' characters at the table, this is a great time for everybody to come together on that.
So what you're saying is that session 0 would be a good time to inform you that we've all agreed we're all going to play Twilight Clerics, right?
I don't like Twilight Clerics.
So the fact that
them.
So the fact that Twilight Clerics are not welcome at Rob's table was a great session 0 conversation.
It's not that I won't allow them, I just won't like them.
Again, character creation is one of the most exciting parts about beginning a new campaign, but during your session 0, I recommend prioritizing discussing the characters' connections with one another rather than who's going to be what class and composing the party that way. Craft some backstories. Talk about how they know each other or how they are tied with one another, even if they haven't necessarily met yet. Save character sheets for later. You can do that stuff on your own and talk about it on Discord. You know, you guys can roll for stats in front of everyone now if you want to, or on Roll20 later. It's up to you. But personally, what I would like to walk away from a session 0 with at minimum is each player's ideal and each player's bond, because that gives you a good insight into what their goals are and how they're motivated.
Everything that we've discussed up to this point are topics and subjects that are essential to have a conversation about to make sure that everyone is expecting the same things out of the campaign. After this point, it is vital, necessary, that you stick with it. Anything that you've agreed upon, you are making a commitment at this time to pursuing. And your consistency in adhering to these things is paramount.
Yeah, consistency is key. And that doesn't just apply to the scheduling. That applies to the fact that if the dungeon master or another player is talking, you're actually engaged and listening to what they're saying at the moment.
If you say flanking isn't a rule at my table, stick with it. If you say no one can play a dwarf in my game, then the next player that joins your campaign better not roll up a dwarf. If one of the players at your table has a phobia of spiders, you'd better not have any spiders show up in the campaign. Again, consistency and commitment to these things that you have just conversed about.
And that's not just a one-way street like from DM to players. The players can put the DM in some awkward situations as well. So if you have agreed to behave in a certain way at the DM's table in order to facilitate their fun or make things easier or even possible for them to run, make sure that you're holding up your end of the deal. The DM is doing a lot of work to make sure that this game continues, and the last thing that you want to do as a player is intentionally or unintentionally spit in the face of that. So these are the things that are on my personal session 0 outline. I go into a little bit more detail here, a little bit less detail there, but these are the things that I want to make sure that I get out of session 0. Now, some people have higher expectations. Some people prioritize character creation, and you know what? I would love to see that happen. If you have time after discussing the integral facets of what the game is going to entail, that should be your next goal.
Yeah, just like a normal D&D session, you probably have a limited amount of time to spend on session 0, just like you will have a limited amount of time to spend on sessions 1, 2, 3, and so on. If you have a little extra time, and some of the players are new especially, it may be good to run them through a scenario or two and get them some experience rolling dice, or run them through a mock combat. If you're playing on a virtual tabletop and someone is not familiar with the software or the website, it might be good to give them a virtual tour and make sure they know how to perform simple tasks that they will be doing a lot.
Definitely. I didn't even think about that online tabletop discussion, but that is definitely something that I had to go through in order to participate in my first online game. The DM had to walk me through all of that.
Our uncle, the Godfather, is transitioning our game that we've been playing for years now on Roll20 over to Fantasy Grounds. And there's a lot of growing pains involved with me going from learning something that I've been playing on for 5 years to something that I'm completely unfamiliar with. And to his credit, he's being very patient with me as I whine.
I've had some DMs that said that you could create your character in your off time, and he wanted to use session 0 to talk about some logistics, and then his priority after that was to run a sample combat. He actually enjoyed running a party battle royale, kind of like the things that Critical Role do sometimes. But it's intended to allow everyone to kind of feel out their character and decide what works in combat, give them a chance to familiarize themselves with them, and also to familiarize them with the capability of the rest of their party.
I could see where you might think that would be a good idea, and I'm not sure I would do that. Session 0 in particular is about bringing the group together as players and as characters in a way. And I don't think I would turn the players on one another just yet.
I actually did not get to participate in a battle royale for the campaign that I played with them, but I always thought that it sounded like a ton of fun. So if given the opportunity, I probably would do it. I'm not sure whether or not I'm going to be including that in any campaign that I run, but I'm certainly intrigued by it. But running a sample combat, whether it be cooperative or competitive, is a very popular choice because that familiarity with your character sheet in practice is a good thing to get underway before session 1. I mean, it would be unfortunate if you were playing a class that you had never played before in a new campaign and died not realizing that you had a bonus to your AC that you forgot to calculate, or a spell that you forgot to write down. So maybe a practice run is a good idea. Maybe even having 2 session 0s, one where you handle logistics and one where you handle character creation. I have done that before.
On the other side of that coin, though, if I was in a sample combat, and as happened in your campaign, I get crit by the very first goblin who got initiative on me, I don't think I would enjoy that session as much, or be looking forward as much to the campaign.
Well, that's actually, for me, all the more reason to do it, because if you decide that, hey, this character doesn't play the way that I imagined that he would, maybe you re-roll a new character prior to the actual beginning of the campaign.
Okay, that's a fair point.
So what about you, listeners? Is there anything in particular that you make sure that you do that we didn't mention? Or is there something that a DM has done during a session 0 that really worked out and you'd like to recommend? We would love to hear more about it. In fact, that is one of the reasons that we created our Discord. We always put a link in the description, and we'd love to have you come there and tell us a little bit more about it. No DM or session 0 is perfect, and we would love to get more feedback and more information on ways we can improve.
I am looking to start some new campaigns here in the very near future. Hopefully ones that I'm going to be able to stream and allow you guys to be participants in.
Ooh, do tell.
Tell me what needs to be in my next session 0 that hasn't occurred to me. I'm not infallible. Steve will be the first one to tell you. So
he's not infallible.
So please, that's part of what I love about this community, is that I can benefit from your experiences just like you can benefit from mine. So don't hesitate to come either on Twitter or in our Discord to let us know what we're missing out on and what we may have accidentally overlooked.
Yeah, communication is important, and that's why we have all these different ways that you can communicate with us. Setting expectations is important as well, so you can expect to hear from us in a couple of weeks for our next episode of Bardic Twinspiration. We'll see you then. The outro music you're listening to right now is called Mega Epic, and the intro music is called Super Epic. Both were composed by the wonderfully talented Alexander Nakarada. You can find more of his music at serpentsoundstudios.com. If you enjoyed our content, please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and review on your listening app of choice. To keep up with us on social media, look us up on facebook.com/Bardic Twinspiration and on Twitter @BTwinspiration. Want to interact with us directly? Come join our Discord. After all, who are we if not people who are willing to roll the dice on making some new friends? Links in the description. Come check it out. Oh, easy there, Tiger. Oh, whoa, what's that? Oh, slow down now. Slow. Hey there, pal. Hey, don't flip your way. He said, "Whoa there, pal, don't flip your wig. That scuttlebutt you got there was the word from the bird. Just come right on in and you'll..." I can't do this line. "Just come right on in and..." I cannot make it through that line.
Is it the writing or is it the acting, though? Listen, chum, I don't want to be a wet rag, but I heard on the grapevine that this was... Man, I can't... I think that sentence is going somewhere else.
Alright, let's see how bad that was.